There's a switch over there which will turn on some really bright lights. So I don't know if you want that spotlight on you or not.
That's just rebuilding slowly.
Just rebuilding. You know, I guess it's pretty common. I'm learning so much about cancer. I guess it's pretty common after
The high story of the Bible.
you burn your parents.
High story.
The elevated story.
English doesn't make any sense.
That's how I feel.
Oh, Sybil being creepy. She's a creepy baby.
Where's Justin and Sarah? Are they coming?
Why is no now? And now is no.
There's a pillow here.
Is it? Can you get?
May I borrow it?
Oh, probably over there. That's fine.
It's okay.
What do you need?
Nothing.
Us?
She needed a pillow and we got her one.
Oh, okay.
There was a couple on the ground.
Oh, I'm fine. I don't need
There's
that.
Sense?
I guess I should probably look at it if we're doing these.
Well,
Have a Bible.
Fantasy books.
Does she?
You read a book and then you listen to the next one.
Do you guys have a dog? Do you have a cat
I
that
got
does
corrected
it?
yesterday by Joshua.
Just Sybil that does it. So
We
she
read the
just
same
learned.
series. He recommends stuff. Oh.
How does it feel to have a child that
what are you
growls?
reading now?
Brett Weeks.
I used to growl at people.
What is it?
I think people laughed,
Light
and so
Bringer
she
series.
kept doing it because it was this kind of positive feedback.
Uh-huh.
Where
So now
I
nowhere to
finished
go.
all of Sanderson's stuff.
At least you know where she's coming from.
Yeah, I've been doing the books on tape. Well, they're not really tapes, but they're audiobooks. For my commute back and forth.
Yeah, I go back and forth. Sometimes I like to read it. Sometimes I like to listen.
Yeah, but I just started reading the first book of
Sometimes I like to do both.
the Stormlight Chronicles.
Oh man, that's
Archive.
such a good series.
What I hear.
Just hang in there.
My list.
It
They
is
lay
kind
a
of,
lot of groundwork first half of the book.
yeah. It's kind of a slow start,
Yep.
but good.
Is it slower starting than the Belgariads in the beginning?
I don't remember that.
That's okay.
Best one I've read recently was Red Rising, though.
Oh, yeah.
That was right up there with
There's so many books I want to read.
Stormlight. Actually, Mistborn I thought was a little better than Stormlight.
This forum's good.
Never thought I'd be a fantasy reader. It's crazy. Just got tired of same plot over and over again on spy stuff. You've read one Ludlum, you've read them all.
Is your mic on?
All right, now it is.
Hey, Palace.
Let me tell you what. Let me
Should
tell
we?
you.
Can you hear me, Justin?
Just one.
I'm not hearing anything.
Can you hear me?
What if we wait to see if anybody else shows up?
I think I'm on.
Pay attention to this.
This is where all this is murdered.
It's up to you. I'll do it.
Okay.
This is where Sybil gets the creepy.
Can you hear me? Is it coming through, Anna?
It is coming through. I'm gonna
Okay.
check online in just a sec.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
All right. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Cornerstone Baptist Church.
I'm not hearing anything.
You're not hearing anything? It looks like it's going through.
Okay.
Are they on, Justin?
Yeah, Matt Vernon, Dane.
Is the headphones on?
Is your microphone?
Testing,
Yeah,
testing.
it's
Mhm.
on. I have it on YouTube too.
Okay.
Bring me the headphones, Justin.
Huh?
Bring me the headphones.
All right. Would somebody like to open us up in prayer? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the blessing of making it to church today and being with the church family and for this beautiful fall weather. Those who aren't with us today, please bless them. And also, Lord, put your hand on our country right now as it needs comfort and peace. In your name, amen.
Amen. All right. So, yeah, this is a continuation of last week. And for those that weren't with us, we were investigating into the history of the Bible, which was kind of a personal dive for me to kind of just get a little bit more to the roots of my faith. And I thought it was just a really important question to really understand, what the Bible means to me. And one of the ways to uncover that was to really understand how it came to be. And so, I think, let's see. First thing I had to answer was which Bible are we talking about? Because there's a lot of Bibles that are out there, and I'll try not to, for the people that were here, we'll just kind of power through some of these things. So there's several Bibles. There's the Hebrew Bible, the Catholic Bible, the Greek Orthodox, and the Protestant Bibles. And these are typically the main Bibles that are applicable to a Christian faith. There we go. So the Hebrew Bible, just as a refresher, it's known as the Tanakh, and there's three parts. There's the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. And the Jewish people basically put a lot of emphasis on the law, the Torah. And they'll use the prophets to basically kind of supplement the law. And so when they go about their teachings, which eventually we'll get there, they basically will go through the Torah, typically like once a year. So they'll basically every week they'll have a part of the Torah that they'll study. And then there will be a prophet section that they'll go along with it. And then the Ketuvim, which are the writings, they'll basically supplement that for a lot of their holidays. Which eventually we'll catch up. Okay, so the Torah is so that's what we were looking at here. And here's the holidays. And then you have the written Torah, and then there's also the oral Torah, which basically helps to provide more clarification to the written Torah. And Jewish tradition is that both the written Torah and the oral Torah were both given to Moses on Mount Sinai. The written Torah obviously was written down, and then the oral Torah was basically passed on through the generations. And until 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, and they figured, okay, maybe we should write these things down so that they're not lost to potential destruction. And so, yeah, they'll basically combine them together. Now, not every, and that's for the bulk of the Jewish people. There are some sects, some denominations that do not hold to that. Some of them basically will just put all the emphasis on the written Torah. But I would say for the most part through the years, they basically will use them together. Now we also looked at the Old Testament timeline. And so on this is where the actual writings, the events, took place, not specifically when the books were written. But this is just to kind of look to see what the history of the Jewish people were over the centuries. And when it came to developing a canon, a specific Jewish canon, we don't really know exactly when it came to be finalized. There's scholars that think it was, during the Hasmonean dynasty, but some people think that it even was finalized after Christ's birth. And so, yeah, we don't really have a whole lot of information in that regards. The oldest available texts, going through this real quick, so the year text is basically the scholar's theoretical first Jewish Bible, the one that basically kind of, when the books started to come together, this basically influenced the canon. But we don't really have an actual existence of that. What we do have are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were primarily religious texts, but they also included a lot of civic letters. There also were little extra, manuscripts that were found, along with them. So, and a lot of them were in pieces. So, it's not that there was an actual form associated with them. They basically were just discovered in clay jars, in these caves outside of Qumran. And these actually weren't discovered until, 1947. So these were a relatively recent discovery. Before that, there was only just small fragments of the Septuagint, which is a Conine Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And those were just small, fragments that have been discovered over time. There also was the Asgar Gilson manuscript that, those were just two pieces of Exodus dated to the 7th and 8th century AD. And then later the Masoretic text, which I moved that up so that you could get it out of the corner so you can actually see that. And so the Masoretic text, basically the old existing copies are the Aleppo Codex, the Codex Exune, the Leningrad Codex. And that's all, later, 9th and 10th century. And so between there, when this came to be and the Dead Sea Scrolls, there basically was kind of a silent era as to, what actually happened to, confirm the canon of the Jewish Bible. Oh, and then, there were a couple little things. The Targums, these are basically Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible, and the most famous would be Targum Onkelos and Jonathan, and these were just found on small clay pots. They're also fragments, so it's not like it's a complete Bible there either. And then we also have evidence of the Samaritan Targum, which was 11th century there. So the Masoretic text, that's 9th, 10th century AD. This basically has come to the forefront as the primary Hebrew Bible, and it's based on all the books that were written in Hebrew. So it excluded a lot of the other Greek and Aramaic books that had come to the front. And part of that was just, I think, scholars basically believe that, there was multiple reasons why they decided to just include the Hebrew texts. It primarily was just to, re-emphasize their tradition, and they also wanted to separate themselves from the Christians who were primarily using the Septuagint as their form of the Old Testament. So it was basically kind of a separation there. And so they have the 24 books, which are based on the number of the scrolls used to compose their Bible. Now the Septuagint, this was the Greek, Koine Greek translation, and Septuagint basically means the 70 in Greek. And so tradition has it, 70 or 72 scholars, Jewish scholars during the 3rd century, basically had come together to create this translation. And the translation, there's a tradition associated with it, with King Ptolemy of Egypt. He wanted a Bible for his library in Alexandria. And so tradition has it that 6 elders from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, which would be the 72 scholars there, were basically hearkened to come to Alexandria, and they all put them into different rooms and charged them to write the Bible. And so they all had written the Torah, and apparently it all matched up from all 72 of them. And so that is what became the Septuagint. In addition to that, during this time frame, the Roman Empire, being what it was, and the Seleucid Empire, Greek was becoming the prevalent language of the area. And so, a lot of people weren't reading and writing Hebrew. And so this also was created to kind of preserve the faith, to basically keep people involved, and so that they can continue to share the Word of God. And so this maintained authority for later Christians, because this is thought to be the primary Bible, the Hebrew Bible, during the time of Jesus. But as to its actual component, what books were actually included in the Septuagint, we aren't entirely sure, because an existing copy no longer is available. So we only have fragments from the 1st and 2nd century BC. The oldest, more complete versions come from the early Christian Bibles, which would be the Vaticanus, the Sinaiticus, or Sinaiticus, and Alexandrinus, which were much later, 4th and 5th century AD. And so these were the books that were included in each of those. And you can see they don't fully match up either, on what books were included. Okay, so that was kind of a refresher from last week. Now we really wanted to start to get into the New Testament, because this is where things really start to, open up even further. Okay, so the New Testament, in its early development, it included a hodgepodge of works. The Apostle Paul's epistles, which were the letters to various leaders of the early Christian church, they were thought to be the first ones likely created. Okay. And a lot of them, were between 50 and 60 AD. The Gospels were thought to be written later, and there's a scholarly debate whether it was Matthew or Mark that was written first. And these theories are known as the Matthean and Markan priority. Most modern scholars favor Markan priority, with Mark being written first around 70 AD. And then Matthew and Luke came after, using Mark as a source, and then further expanding upon it. This view is evidenced by shared content, ordering of events, literary patterns, and examples of editorial fatigue. Other scholars believe Matthew may have been written in the late 50 or early 60 AD due to a comment by early church leader Irenaeus in the 2nd century. And he stated that Matthew also issued a written gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect, while Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome and laying the foundations of the church. And so if we hold that to be true, then it would have needed to be written before Peter and Paul were killed, which happened sometime, between 60 and 70 AD. John is the last one, to have written a gospel, and I think most scholars will agree on that. This is also supported by Irenaeus, who states, "Afterward John, the disciple of the Lord, who had also leaned upon his breast, did himself publish a gospel during his residence at Ephesus in Asia." And earlier church records had John living the final years of his life in Ephesus, dying near the end of the 1st century. So it's thought that he wrote it just before he died. The universal epistles, which comprises the letters of 1st and 2nd Peter, John 1, 2, and 3, James, and Jude, they were likely written in the second half of the 1st century, and they were targeted for a general church rather than a specific audience. Early on, only 1 John and 1 Peter were read widely, with the others primarily being regionally based. And the book of Acts, although written by Luke, actually did not receive popularity until the end of the 2nd century. The book of Revelation was widely read by the end of the 1st century, but was much more popular in the Western Roman Empire than in the East. And there was much debate regarding the origin of the book and how it should be interpreted, which we're still diving into that. While these books would eventually become part of the New Testament canon, they were not the only valued writings by early Christians. There were many other letters, such as the Epistle of Clement, who was the Bishop of Rome in the late 1st century. There was the Epistle of Barnabas, who was the companion of Paul. There were many other Gospels, including the Gospel of Peter, Thomas, Judas, Mary, Philip. There were Acts of John, Peter, Andrew, Paul, Thomas, and even multiple apocalypse, or apocalypse, which include the Apocalypse of Peter and the Shepherd of Hermas. And they were all read and even considered authoritative by some early churches. Reliance on these texts, however, would have varied a lot due to a lack of uniformity of worship processes, and just in general from general geographical separation. So I wanted to show this. So this is a picture of the several journeys of the Apostle Paul. And so he was basically spreading the gospel, throughout the Roman Empire. And so it was a pretty large area. And it took him years to do all this. Now, granted, he also was shipwrecked in the middle of the Mediterranean for many years, so that probably didn't help. But yeah, the point is it's a pretty large area. And so you got these texts, kind of going back and forth, and you can kind of see how the pockets, may start to develop. I also wanted to show you, so I was like, well, how long would it take to actually get to some of these places? Now this is, modern day Google, so I just plugged this in. And so I wrote down some of these. Okay, so Jerusalem, down here, all the way up to Colossae would be 940 miles, which, if you walk that straight, according to Google, would take you 14 days and 9 hours. But if you average 20 miles a day, which is general what people say, that would take 47 days to get there. Okay? And then Colossae, so here's Jerusalem, here's Colossae. Colossae then to Philippi would be 551 miles, which would take you 8 days and 10 hours. That would be 24 hours a day. Yeah, if you did 20 miles a day, it would be 27.6 days to get you there. All right. And then Philippi to Thessaloniki. So yeah, these are closer. All right, so that would be 95 miles. So that's 1 day, 11 hours straight. Or almost 5 days if you did 20 miles a day. Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure horseback could have made things a little easier, or burro back, but Turkey's, very hilly, there's a lot of hills in Turkey. And then the last one, Thessaloniki, to Corinth would be 300 miles, and that would be 4 days, 15 hours, or straight, or 15 days, if you're taking your time. So yeah, it's a big geographical area. So a lot of separation. But that's what you did back then. If you needed to get somewhere, you just strap on your sandals and you just do it. And so visitors would travel back and forth between these churches, and they would see what other people were reading and doing, and that they would copy text. Oh yeah, you're reading James. Oh yeah, we should write that down, and we'll share that with our church back home. And so yeah, there was a lot of interlinking, that way. Now the earliest New Testament manuscripts, all right, there's actually an online database that's maintained by the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. And there's a lot that's out there. Now, granted, by a lot, I mean, these are all pieces of fragments of books. But, they have quite a few. These are the earliest ones. So these are, 2nd and 3rd century. And so there's 12 fragments that have been identified to this time period, the most famous of which is Papyrus P52, which that's what it is.
So how did they get complete books?
Well, so we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, because we do have, there's some bigger books that have come later on. Yeah, but these are like the earliest copies, of the originals. All right. So P52 includes John 18:31 to 33 on the front, and then on the back there's verses 37 and 38. And this was purchased in 1920 by Bernard Grenfell on the Egyptian antiquities market. But he really didn't know what it was until 1934 when it was translated. And they found out, oh yeah, this is actually from the Gospel of John. And so it's originally dated between 100 and 150 AD. Modern methods may date it just a little later. But even still, so if the original Gospel of John was written in the later part of the 1st century, this fragment was likely copied within 100 years or so of the original, that's kind of cool. And further interestingly, this parchment comes from a book form rather than an actual scroll. So yeah, there could have been some compilation of things even, that early. And since the manuscript was discovered in Egypt, which is a significant distance from Ephesus, that basically just shows that, the text was being copied and just widely circulated potentially by, the end of the 2nd century. Now, who knows the actual life of this until it was actually found in Egypt, but yeah, I mean, it just kind of shows that things were spreading. And just to show you on the map, so I didn't have that in, but the white box here with the little person, that's basically Ephesus here, and then here's Alexandria and Egypt. So yeah, it would have had to find its way all the way down there.
And you wouldn't have had to go directly by land. You could have gone.
Yes, you could have taken a boat, yeah. But the point is that things were spreading. Yeah. Oh, true. Yeah. Yeah.
Their religious alliances, and so Egypt became a hub of Christian writing collection. And so, it started as, distributions among church members, but as Christianity as a big kind of lowercase c Christianity spread, those things became more sought after by people with the funds to
Oh, sure.
get them.
Oh, sure.
Ethiopian Eastern Orthodox has a very old Bible too. Theirs has not been stuck in it.
Yeah. Well, in fact, we're going to be getting into that just in a little bit.
Sorry,
No,
I'll
that's
keep my
okay.
mouth shut, Jeff. I'm sorry.
No. You're getting into it. That's good. But yeah, it's, the point is that things were spreading. And, they really didn't come together to create a canon until much later. Okay, so timeline, early Christianity. So the first evidence that a canon was trying to be made comes in 140 AD by Marcion, which is who was a Turkish businessman and church leader. And he focused on a shorter version of the Gospel of Luke, which was the Evangelion, and then included 10 letters of Paul, which is the Apostolicon. Okay. But he also excluded the Old Testament and any references to Jewish scripture. Basically just cut it all out. Complete separation. Then, in 170 AD, there was the Dicasteron. So Syrian writer Tacitus attempted to unify the 4 Gospels to create one harmonious narrative of Jesus' life. And that's known as the Dicasteron. And apparently was very popular with one early church leader, Irenaeus, who proclaimed it to be authoritative. And through the years, it was used by many Christian denominations, but had a particular influence in Syria as the primary text until it was later replaced by the Peshitta, which has since become the primary Syrian Bible. And that dates to 40 AD. And the Peshitta accepted 22 books, which excluded 2 Peter, 2nd and 3rd John, Jude, and Revelation. 400 AD, excuse me. Then there was the Muratorian canon, which is dated sometime between the 2nd and 4th centuries. And this is perhaps the earliest known list of most of the books that would eventually compose the New Testament. It is missing Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, and John 3, but also includes the Wisdom of Solomon and the Apocalypse of Peter. Now, when Emperor Constantine I converted to Christianity and issued the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, religious freedom was granted to all in the Roman Empire, and this allowed Christianity to flourish without persecution. And he later sought to expand Christian teachings in 331 AD by commissioning the construction of 50 Bibles to be used among Christian churches in his capital city, Constantinople. Among those, some scholars believe that Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus are thought to be among the 50 that were made. The creation of these Bibles may have influenced the need to further define an official canon. In 367 AD, Athanasius, who was the Bishop of Alexandria, he was the first to recommend the eventual 27 books of the New Testament as canonical in his festal letter, which is basically like a church bulletin. Then, the Council of Rome in 383, I think that should be 382 AD, is thought to possibly be the first to actually issue a list of the accepted Old and New Testament books, known as the Damascene list, as part of the Decretum Gelatianum. Although some scholars state that this may have been retroactively issued at a later time. So that brings us then to the Council of Hippo, which in 393 is the general consensus to be the time when the church said, all right, this is it. This is the canon that we're going to be going with. And so they confirmed the 27 books of the New Testament and 46 books of the Old Testament, which I'll show you. The Catholic Church. The Church of the time. Yeah, the Church of the time. And then the canon was further ratified at the councils of Carthage 397 and 419 AD. Well, so having these bishops, I'm sure they had geographical, areas that things were separate. I'm actually not really sure when the official pope came to be. I'm sure. Mm. Mm-hmm. I would think so, because it would be the existing hierarchy.
The hierarchy
Was
was already kind of forming prior to that.
it?
I think that's what I was trying to, like, where did the idea of Catholicism and the hierarchy start? Was it around this like the 300s?
I would think so, because that's when they actually were allowed to propagate. Because before then everything was it was a persecuted faith.
But they had already started establishing kind of a hierarchy before
Oh, really?
persecuted because they were, if you think about it, Rome was made up of lots of different cultures.
Sure.
A lot of them were bringing in their own, Greek religion, different
control what's practiced and read. They tried to set up kind of leadership offices.
Sure. Which is why I think, just, doing this type of study and then hearing about Justin's study, it's all together. Oh, Anna, can I move to the next slide? Oh, okay. So we're getting close to 11, but I did want to show you one more thing. If we, yeah. Okay. Okay, there we go. So this was taken from a website that had laid out the English translation of the Decretum Gelasianum. So yeah, that was when the Council of Rome in 382 started to decree that this was eventually going to be canon. And so there were several church business agenda items that were addressed. I didn't include any of that. They also confirmed the accepted biblical canon at the time. But it also included a list of apocryphal books at the time, which were eventually basically reviewed, rejected, and then damned. And so just seeing some of these things. So this is a banned book list. And so here's one part of it. Okay, here's another part of it. Here's another part of it. And so there was a lot of just new, books that had been portrayed and eventually found to be lacking, in authority. Mm-hmm.
So are these the same? Are some of these the same books that are in our current Bible, or are
No.
these other ones that share similar names but are not?
So yes, yeah, these are not the ones that were,
Were you even able to find any of these anymore?
Well, I doubt it.
Doubt it.
I doubt it. If we can't even find the original ones that were accepted, I
These
doubt.
are probably all burned.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe not.
I do think Pastor has a couple of these books on his bookshelf that he's been able to source. I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
You have to ask him.
He said something about Barnabas.
Yeah. So yeah, there's Barnabas right there. So yeah, they didn't include Barnabas. Even from early on, they did not include it.
I'm curious what's in there.
Mm.
I kind of want to just read the book
Yeah.
of Mary.
No,
to be
some of
honest.
them look so fascinating just by title.
I know.
I
I
first
want to read it.
found out about this when they were discovering the Book of Judas,
Mm.
or rediscovering what they thought was the Book of Judas.
Sure.
And how it was his own version of events,
Mm.
and it was eventually lost and refound. And I think one of the guys just did a big spread on it.
Oh, sure. But yeah, I'm sure there was, lots of reasons why a text would be rejected. Whether it just didn't have the authority or, a lot of false, teachings and, pseudo authors.
Tertullian was a much later writer, so I think when they were compiling the books of the Bible, they were trying to find basically documents that would have been centered somewhere within the first 100 years after the death of Jesus, and would have been probably more associated with in that were either directly associated with Jesus or secondhand, like Paul obviously didn't have the first-hand experience with Jesus when he was alive, per se.
Sure.
The first time, but obviously met him and after his resurrection.
Yeah.
We'll get into this too, but plagiarism became a huge problem.
Oh, for sure.
For the in the first third of the century.
You
A
see
lot,
forgeries.
yeah, a lot of people claiming to be the apostles or even someone that had direct contact with Jesus.
Early Reddit writers.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was a lot out there. And then one more, if you can, go back. I also saw all amulets which are compiled in the name of the angels as they pretend, but are written in the names of great demons.
Oh, no.
I was like, wow, that's cool.
Okay, that's something.
So not only were they rejecting the books, but also, things that were thought to hold power. Yeah. So, interesting.
Very intriguing.
Yeah.
I do love the language, though. It says, rejected, to be damned in the inextricable shackles of anathema forever. Like, there's
Yes.
no misunderstanding what the stance is.
Yes.
And unfortunate, too, at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like little trinkets, like protective trinkets that says are compiled not in the name of the angels as they pretend, but are written with the names of demons. So you think maybe you're getting a cool St. Michael necklace, and it's like Beelzebub.
It's kind of like the California crystal culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Which you might find that last statement down there to be, interesting and pretty cool in how it turned out, but at the same time, that means that any person that was found with any writing that was not given a stamp of approval by the Catholic Church at that time
This is true.
would have been considered an anathema to the church, rejected by the church, completely cut off from it in all respects. The leaders probably would have been, and leaders and all followers would have been persecuted.
Oh, so you're saying that could have been written as a tool for control, political control of the people?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay,
But-
that totally makes sense.
But, at the
I can
time,
attest to that.
Yeah.
because there was so much, misinformation, false prophets, if you're trying to really consolidate, your religion, you basically have to make very firm, declarations. Yeah. Because, here we are. This is, nearly 400 AD, so it'd be, 300 years, 350 years after Christ died. I'm sure there was a lot of just random stuff that had spread, in that time frame.
Gotta pick out what's false and what's accurate.
All right, well, we're about 5 after, so this is probably a good place to stop. There's a lot more to come. Yeah, because, we'll actually get into the codices then. And
Stop, and this is too interesting, man.
That's why it's leaving us on a cliffhanger, so we come back next Sunday.
yeah, so we'll see eventually how this turned into the Catholic canon, which then started to divide into other canons. All right. Any other questions?